Well, thank you all so much for joining me. I'm Forgiveness Willie, teaching forgiveness from the Ozarks here on Tuesday, January the 21st of 2025's lesson 21 in A Course in Miracles. We're reading this year from the Foundation for Inner Peace version of A Course in Miracles. And we're supposed to have 5 one-minute practice periods today. So let's do one of the practice periods as we open. I'll kind of lead you in what to do. Let's take a couple minutes to sing this song and try to take a minute of mind searching. I am determined to see things differently. I am determined to see things differently. I am determined to see somebody differently. Think of somebody you're upset with. I am determined to see differently. Name that person. And let's do another one. I am determined to see blank differently. I am determined to see differently. Let's do a couple more. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see differently. Or maybe it's a situation you're upset with. I am determined to see a situation differently. Now you fill in the blank. I am determined to see blank differently. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see an irritation in somebody differently. Now you think one. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see things differently. I am determined to see things differently. Okay, well, thank you again for joining me today and studying A Course in Miracles. Like I said, we're on lesson 21. Let's read through it now so that if you haven't read it already, if you've already read it this morning, this will be another review. Maybe you'll learn something new. I am determined to see. We have been quite, that's yesterday's. Today, I am determined to see things differently. The idea for today is obviously a continuation and extension of the preceding one. This time, however, specific mind-searching periods are necessary, in addition to applying the idea to particular situations as they may arise. 5 practice periods are urged, allowing a full minute for each. So 5 times today for 1 minute, you're going to search your mind. We're truly going to enter into the world of meditation. He gives us a certain thing we're going to do in our minds. Search for things that irritate us. In the practice periods, begin by repeating the idea to yourself. I'm determined to see things differently. Then close your eyes and search your mind carefully for situations, past, present, and anticipated, that arouse anger in you. The anger may take the form of any reaction ranging from mild irritation to rage. The degree of the emotion you experience does not matter. You will become increasingly aware that a slight twinge of annoyance is nothing more than a veil drawn over intense fury. Try, therefore, not to let the little thoughts of anger escape you in the practice periods. Remember that you do not really recognize what arouses anger in you, and nothing that you believe in this connection means anything. We're building on our lesson 1. Nothing I see means anything. We're trying to have that open mind so we can find what really does cause anger. Remember that you do not really recognize what arouses anger in you, and nothing that you believe in this connection means anything. You will probably be tempted to dwell more on some situations or persons than on others, on the fallacious grounds that they are more obvious. This is not so. It is merely an example of the belief that some forms of attack are more justified than others. Okay, so in other words, you thought that it was more obvious that you're upset but he's saying the reason why it's so obvious is because you're more allowing yourself to be angry at that person because of what they did. And what he calls it, it's an example of the belief that some forms of attack are more justified than others. We want to get away from all those concepts that attack is justified. As you search your mind for all the forms in which attack thoughts present themselves, hold each one in mind while you tell yourself. And remember, he's used the word anger thoughts, what you're looking for. Now he's using the word attack thoughts, which are the same thing. They all make you upset. We want to get rid of anything that makes us upset. But we have to spot it first. We have to know that we're fearful before we can let it go. And you might say, well, that's not fear. Yes, it is. When you're upset, angry, that's just another word for fear. There's only 2 emotions. Think of it that way, love and fear. And so channel it into one of those initial things, and you'll find one speaks for the ego and one speaks for God. As you search your mind for all the forms in which attack thoughts present themselves, hold each one in mind while you tell yourself, I'm determined to see, and then name a person differently. So I'm determined to see blank. Search your mind, find someone you're upset with and fill in the blank and say, I'm determined to see whoever differently. Or you might specify a situation by saying, I'm determined to see such and such situation differently. And name it. Try to be as specific as possible. You may, for example, focus your anger on a particular attribute of a particular person, believing that the anger is limited to this aspect. If your perception is suffering from this form of distortion, say, I'm determined to see, and specify the attribute and name the person differently. I'm determined to see blank in blank differently. Okay, so we'll do one more of those as we close, and then you'll do 3 more today, and that'll be your 5 for the day for 1 minute. Okay, let's go take a look, and I'm going to put my gloves on. It's a little cold out here. I do have a hot rock sitting in my lap so that I can warm my fingers up if I need to, but I'm going to put my gloves on as we read this just to kind of hold a little bit more heat. Okay, perception versus knowledge, which is Roman numeral 3 in chapter 3, the innocent perception. We have been emphasizing perception and have said very little about knowledge as yet. This is because perception must be straightened out before you can know anything. To know is to be certain. Uncertainty means you do not know. Knowledge is power because it is certain. Certainty is strength. Perception is temporary. Even though it's temporary, we still have to we want to get our perception straightened out before we can know anything he's telling us. Perception is temporary. As an attribute of the belief in space and time, it is subject to either fear or love. Misperceptions produce fear, and true perceptions foster love. But neither bring certainty because all perception varies. Misperceptions produce fear, and true perceptions foster love, but neither bring certainty because all perception varies. That is why it is not knowledge. True perception is the basis for knowledge. But knowing is the affirmation of truth, and beyond all perception. Paragraph 2, all your difficulties stem from the fact that you do not recognize yourself, your brother, or God. Wow, he's really giving us a lot of heads up here. All your difficulties, any problem you have, any fear, any upset, any discomfort, all your problems, all your difficulties, he says, stem from the fact that you do not recognize yourself, your brother, or God. That's why Yogananda taught self-realization. And of course, when you realize yourself, you realize you're connected to God and your brother. To recognize means to know again, implying that you knew before. You can see in many ways because perception involves interpretation, and this means that it is not whole or consistent. The miracle, being a way of perceiving, is not knowledge. It is the right answer to a question, but you do not question when you know. Questioning illusions is the first step in undoing them. Questioning illusions is the first step in undoing them. So remember how we talked about that in order to first you have to know that you're fearful before you can apply the atonement or forgiveness. Well, he's saying questioning illusions is the first step in undoing them. The miracle, or the right answer, corrects them. Since perceptions change, their dependence on time is obvious. How you perceive at any given time determines what you do, and actions must occur in time. Knowledge is timeless, because certainty is not questionable. You know when you have ceased to ask questions. That's obvious, isn't it? But questions hold a really important part when we don't know, don't they? So it's good to ask questions, but you'll eventually get to the place where you know, and you won't need to ask questions. Paragraph 3. The questioning mind perceives itself in time and therefore looks for future answers. The closed mind believes the future and the past will be the same. This establishes a seemingly stable state that is usually an attempt to counteract an underlying fear that the future will be worse than the present. This fear inhibits the tendency to question at all. So a lot of closed-minded ways of looking at the world is because we're afraid the future is going to be worse than what's going on now. So we just don't question anything. Better to just stay where we're at rather than get something worse. Okay, paragraph 4. True vision is the natural perception of spiritual sight, but it is still a correction rather than a fact. Spiritual sight is symbolic and therefore not a device for knowing. It is, however, a means of right perception which brings it into the proper domain of the miracle. A vision of God would be a miracle rather than a revelation. The fact that perception is involved at all removes the experience from the realm of knowledge. That is why visions, however holy, do not last. Paragraph 5. The Bible tells you to know yourself or be certain. Now, that's a hard one I'm not exactly sure where he was referring to where the Bible says to know yourself. But let me give you a few that you might check out and see if you kind of think. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the whole chapter is worth reading. But in verse 12, he says that will someday be known as even, that someday we'll know even as we also have been known. I get it that God knows us. Sometimes we'll know ourselves in the same way. Romans 12:3 and Psalms 139, 23, and 24. Those are a few places. I'll put them in the description below, so if you want to go back and do a little deeper look into those. The Bible tells you to know yourself or to be certain. Certainty is always of God. When you love someone, you have perceived him as he is, and this makes it possible for you to know him. Until you first perceive him as he is, you cannot know him. So he says you have to love him in order to know him as he is. When you love someone, you have perceived him as he is, and this makes it possible for you to know him. Until you first perceive him as he is, you cannot know him. While you ask questions about him, you're clearly implying that you do not know him. Certainty does not require action. When you say you're acting on the basis of knowledge, you're really confusing knowledge with perception. Knowledge provides the strength for creative thinking, but not for right doing. Perception, miracles, and doing are closely related. Knowledge is the result of revelation and induces only thought. Even in its most spiritualized form, perception involves the body. Knowledge comes from the altar within and is timeless because it is certain. To perceive the truth is not the same as to know it. Paragraph 6. My teacher used to say the best way to know something is just to know it. And my teacher, Charlie, my yoga teacher, before I came into A Course in Miracles, or before I got studied into death, I'd heard about it, but didn't really understand it. Didn't even know to look into it deeply. Paragraph 6. Right perception is necessary before God can communicate directly to his altars, which he established in his sons. Let's read that again. Right perception is necessary before God can communicate directly to his altars, which he established in his sons. And the reason why is because if your perception's so erratic and you're upset with things, then you won't be calm enough to be able to get a revelation from God and let him speak to you directly. There he can communicate his certainty, and his knowledge will bring peace without question. God is not a stranger to his sons, and his sons are not strangers to each other. Knowledge preceded both perception and time and will ultimately replace it, or replace them. Knowledge preceded both perception and time and will ultimately replace them. That is the real meaning of Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. And that's a phrase that's used in the book of Revelations in 3 different places. Revelations 1:8, Revelations 21:6, and Revelations 22:13. So he says that knowledge preceded both perception and time and will ultimately replace them. That is the real meaning of Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. And before Abraham was, I am. And that's a quote Jesus made, recorded in John chapter 8, verse 58, referring to himself. Before Abraham was, I am. But we're learning now, knowledge preceded both perception and time and will ultimately replace them. That is the real meaning of Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. And before Abraham was, I am. Perception can and must be stabilized, but knowledge is stable. Fear God and keep his commandments becomes know God and accept his certainty. And that's a quote out of Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13. And the last paragraph, 7. If you attack error in another, you will hurt yourself. That's why we want to look and see what angers and attacks we are feeling inside ourselves and let them go. If you attack error in another, you will hurt yourself. You cannot know your brother when you attack him. Attack is always made upon a stranger. You are making him a stranger by misperceiving him, and so you cannot know him. It is because you have made him a stranger that you are afraid of him. Perceive him correctly so that you can know him. There are no strangers in God's creation. To create as he created, you can create only what you know and therefore accept as yours. God knows his children with perfect certainty. He created them by knowing them. He recognizes them perfectly. When they do not recognize each other, they do not recognize him. Wow. How can man say that he loves God when he doesn't love his, or doesn't love his, how can you say you love God whom you have not seen when you don't love your neighbor or your brother whom you have seen? I think, was that in James, I think? Okay, let's see. I am determined to see things differently. We'll sing that song as we close here in a few minutes. What's going on around the world? This is the week of prayer for Christian unity, and I'd like to just drop the word Christian off there. This is week of prayer for unity. Let's just be united with all our brothers and sisters. Let's love them. Okay. International Play Date Day. That's where parents arrange to have their children play together. Mariachi Day, which I think is a good thing to do. Kids ought to make sure your kids get to play with other kids. Mariachi Day, Mexican Folk Music Day, Conscious Uncoupling Day. You know, if a person's going to separate, you want to do it consciously, is what they're trying to imply, which that's a very nice thing to do. You know, still change it from maybe a relationship where you're in a really, you know, a committed relationship perhaps, but you still love one another, but just a different kind of love. Maybe that's what that's all about. I like that idea for those, rather than, you know, those long drawn out court cases and arguments and lifetimes of hatred. We don't want that. Ever. Conscious Uncoupling Day. Hugging Day, or hug your puppy day, or hug a puppy day. Hugging Day anyway is today. I found all these on holidays and observances, most of them. One-liner day, and I tell you my favorite one-liner: love your neighbor as yourself. Own your own home day, nice when you can. Squirrel Appreciation Day. The eastern gray squirrel which is our squirrels, we have a lot of them around here, is the Scirus carolinensis is one of the species. Niger is another species, and Wholenes is another species. But they're all that Scirus, and they're the eastern gray squirrel. But there's several different species of those. Anyway, since it's Squirrel Appreciation Day out there, anyway, might as well learn a little bit about squirrel. Here's something I found about squirrels. They eat about their body weight, which is about 1.5 pounds per week, in all those nuts they hunt. And how do they find those nuts? To me, that's amazing how they can go find them again. But anyway, it says they use memory, smell, and landmarks. And then an edible landscaping, pomegranate. The last pomegranate they have in edible landscaping, the Punic granatums, is the Surh, Anor, maybe, pomegranate. And it says the Surh, Anor pomegranate is a pink variety with high quality large fruit. It is slow to break bud, which makes it resistant to late winter cold. Surh, Anor is also resistant to high humidity problems in the summer. Self-fertile, zone 7 through 9. Of course, we're learning that you can grow these in zone 6 with a little protection, you know, on the south side of a building. Now, our word for peace, let's use the word from the Lakota. The Lakota of the high plains up there, northern plains, you know, like mainly south and north and south Dakota, that area. And their word for peace, they've got a couple of them I found, Wawonwa, but Wolakhota. I know I'm saying that right because I found a word, someone who said it. And I listened. Wolakhota. Wolakhota be with you. So peace be with you. Now let's see if we can't do one of our 1-minute meditations as we close here. Wolakhota or Wawanwa. And I'm not sure if Wawanwa is the right way to say that. They're both words for peace in Lakota tongue. which I really, let me just say, I appreciate the Lakota because they've been so welcoming to the European descent English speaking people in helping to learn their songs and their customs. And so anyway, if you want to study a little bit about the Lakota people, they're more forthgiving of sharing their songs than a lot of different tribes are. So I appreciate about that, you Lakota people. Thank you. Wolakhota. Peace. I am determined to see things differently. I am determined to see things differently. Now, think of somebody you're upset with. I am determined to see blank differently. Let's do a few more. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see differently. Search your mind. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see differently. Or maybe a situation. I am determined to see a situation differently. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see differently. I am determined to see differently. Or maybe an irritation about somebody specifically, an attribute in them. Let's do them. I am determined to see an irritation in somebody differently. And I'll be quiet now. I am determined. Differently. I am determined to see things differently. Okay, well, thanks again for joining me today on this cold. I think it's supposed to be pretty cold, even more cold next couple days. So, anyway, out of our Lakota word for peace is Wolakhota. Wolakhota, peace be with you. I am determined to see things differently. Do your 5 1-minute mind-searching periods and tell yourself, I am determined to see blank differently. I am determined to see things differently. Wolakhota.